Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer. I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. We tend to want our lives to make sense. We want there to be a clear sense of cause and effect in the things that happen to us. This desire is so strong and so natural that it's difficult to imagine anybody who might want things to be otherwise. Why would anybody want their life to be a series of haphazard events in which what actually happens has no relationship to any prior cause? This sense of order is so powerful and so natural that it may be hardwired into the brain. When it happens that things don't work according to a strict cause and effect regimen, our lives go into temporary dysfunction. We simply don't know what to do under these circumstances. Until they get back into that sense of order and control, we may go into a type of panic mode. We like to pretend that the norm is that sense of order, while it is only in those rare moments of chaos that things don't go according to plan. But while there may be a certain amount of truth to this assumption, we all know that things frequently don't follow the rules. The question is, what are we supposed to do when things go haywire? This week's Parsha is called Miketz. It is a simple title that translates as "at the end." While that translation has an ominous ring to it, it is really a rather harmless phrase that refers to the end of a 2-year period that Joseph had spent in jail following the false accusation against him that he had tried to seduce his master's wife. Knowing that he had been falsely charged and sent to jail with no evidence against him made these 2 years particularly long for him. But as things happened, it was during those 2 years that his ticket out of jail materialized. This came in the form of the dreams of his 2 cellmates, which he interpreted with great accuracy and predicted what would take place in their lives. One was restored to his former position as the cupbearer for Pharaoh. It was after this span of 2 years since that event that things started to happen that would lead to Joseph's release. Pharaoh himself had a couple of dreams that could not be interpreted to his satisfaction. In this state of confusion, this cupbearer remembered what had happened to him in jail, and they brought Joseph out to see if he could interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Pharaoh told him the dreams, the classic biblical scene of the 7 healthy grains or cows being consumed by the 7 weak or famished-looking grains or cows. Without batting an eyelash, Joseph interpreted these dreams as an indication of 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh immediately accepted this as the proper interpretation and proclaimed to all present there was nobody wiser in all of Egypt than Joseph. As a reward for his wisdom, Pharaoh appointed him as the viceroy and put him in charge of grain storage during the years of plenty to prepare for the upcoming years of famine. While all this might seem to us today as highly unlikely, in the Bible it reads as the most natural course events could have taken. Next, the scene switches back to Jacob's family in Canaan. The famine hits there, of course, and Jacob insists that his remaining sons, with the exception of the youngest, Benjamin, go to Egypt to bring back some grain. They head to Egypt expecting nothing but what should have happened, getting their grain and returning. Instead, Joseph recognizes them, even though they don't recognize him, and he puts them through a grilling over accusations of spying out the land. They, of course, deny all this and fill him in on some details of their family history, including that their father is alive and that they have a younger brother back home. Joseph sets things up so that they have to prove their innocence by returning back home and then coming back to Egypt with their younger brother. He even takes one of the brothers as a prisoner to serve as collateral to ensure that they will return. It is in the course of all this apparent chaos that is happening to them that a strange thing takes place. Quote, "They said to one another, 'But we are guilty over our brother whom we saw his suffering and his pleading to us, yet we did not listen. It is for this that we are forced to undergo this suffering.' Then Reuben responded to them and said, 'Did I not warn you to not sin against the boy? And you did not listen. and now his blood is being revenged. This unexpected voicing of regret, of course, is over the incident that took place several years earlier, when these same brothers, in their jealousy over the favoritism Jacob had shown Joseph, and over Joseph's foolish attempt to tell them about his dreams of them bowing down to him, decided to kill him. In the end, rather than resort to such a drastic measure, they sold him to a passing caravan. In the middle of all that, Reuben, the oldest brother, tried to put a stop to all the plotting and to bring Joseph back to his father. Needless to say, he failed, and Joseph was sold, and that is how he ended up where he was. But the brothers, of course, were unaware of all that and could only suspect that his fate was to be either a slave or dead. So there was no reason for them to pin their current state of affairs back to the tragic incident of the past. The two had nothing to do with each other, at least as far as they were concerned. So why did they bring it up at all? The answer to this is obvious. They were going through a situation that clearly made no sense whatsoever. All they did was come to Egypt to buy food. What should have happened was simply buying their food and then heading straight back home. Instead, they found themselves in this crazy situation with this guy in charge of the grain storage accusing them of all kinds of things that didn't contain a shred of truth. On top of that, he was throwing them in prison and holding one of them as ransom until they returned with their missing younger brother. What could account for this strange turn of events? There was nothing that could account for it. So rather than attributing it all to bad luck or just freak bureaucratic mix-up, they reached back into the past to grasp at some straws to make sense of things. The only obvious thing to attribute all this to was their guilt in selling their brother. Now, it must be pointed out that prior to all this, they had never expressed any guilt over this. From the incident itself, we read that they were perfectly satisfied with their decision to sell him. They even sat down to eat a meal in the middle of it all, while Joseph was trapped down in a pit. So why now all this belated regret? Because they needed something to make sense of what was happening to them. It should be noted that the Torah gives no indication that they were wrong in their desperate attempt to find a reason for their situation. On the contrary, it gives every indication that this sudden guilt and regret was appropriate, if not too little too late. Everything they said was true. They were guilty of ignoring his suffering and his pleading. Reuben was correct in reminding them he had warned them not to do this terrible thing to their younger brother. He was also correct in insisting that Joseph's blood was now being avenged. If anything, this is the core message of this entire story of buying the grain and everything that happened as a result. It was so that they should be forced to suffer and to realize the suffering they had put their brother through. Sometimes this is the way it has to be. We just don't see what is right in front of our eyes. We are 100% positive that we are correct in whatever it is or was that we did, and nothing can possibly convince us otherwise. Nothing except for some subtle or not so subtle message suggesting that maybe we are not so innocent and so perfect. Sometimes this is what it takes to drive a message into our thick skulls, even though that message was there all along for us to read. It takes a seemingly unrelated event to wake us up to the obvious. This perhaps is the real message of this whole story in the Torah. Unrelated things are not so unrelated. We can go through apparent chaos in our lives in which things happen to us that have no rational explanation, and we get frustrated over the lack of justice or consistency in our lives. Even devout atheists will blame the chaos on the non-existent God they refuse to believe in. Is this rational? Not in the least. Does it solve an immediate problem? Absolutely. Is there anything really to all this other than it makes us feel a little better or a little worse? Possibly. The fact is, we really haven't the foggiest idea of what makes things happen in our lives. We would like to believe that there is some sort of direct cause and effect that controls everything, but we all know that this simply isn't the case much of the time. So what else is there? Well, for starters, there is this karma-like effect from other events in our life that may have something to do with why things happen the way they do. Although it's not easy to trace the connection sometimes, at others it is simply a matter of opening up the eyes. The case with Joseph's brothers is a great example of this. Crazy things were happening to them. They had this hidden and suppressed guilt over what they did to Joseph sometime in the past. Perhaps there was a connection between the two. It was simply a matter of connecting the dots. While it may not be this obvious much of the time, there is always a way to find an answer. It may seem like a stretch, but it's better than chaos. Of course, the price we pay for this biblical type of karma is that we may have to do something to remedy the past to straighten out the present. That seems like a small price to pay for such a major gain. To all the naysayers who will tell you that this is all just a ridiculous effort, which is the epitome at grasping at straws, you can tell them that they believe what they wish to believe, and you can believe what you wish to believe. Belief determines a surprisingly significant component of our reality. It determines if we have hope for the future, if we see others as inherently good or evil, and if we think our own lives have any meaning or purpose, to name just a few things. It's really been left up to us to fine-tune our lives to be the way we choose them to be. It may not make us rich or famous. It may not help always to get what we want, but it sure might help with coping with many of life's ups and downs. Shabbat Shalom.